Hey everybody, today is Monday, December 18th, 2023. Coming up on the show today, from American Fiction, editor Hilda Rasula.
This is a place where we're going to share confidences. This is a place where we can be comfortable if they need to take a nap, if they need to talk about their mom while laying down on the couch. Anything they need to do, which directors do, you have to set the stage for them feeling comfortable for that. A dialogue scene in some ways can be a very simple scene to cut, and in some ways is, I think, the hardest scene to cut. Trying to get the vibe right between two characters, trying to make the feeling match the feeling that you had when you read the scene on the page is like this thing that I'm always chasing. Oh my God, what an amazing intro.
Well, thanks, Hilda. But that's just a little bit of what you're about to hear on this edition of The Rough Cut. Hey there. Thanks for downloading and or streaming the show. Hopefully it wasn't an accident. Even if it was, don't go yet. You might learn something and have a good time. That's the idea anyway. Today we will be discussing the dramedy American Fiction, although it's probably more of a comedy than a drama. Drama shouldn't get top billing in the way that dramedy implies. Today we will be discussing the there you go, American Fiction. American Fiction marks the directorial debut of Cord Jefferson, who, up to this point, has spent most of his career as a writer. Luckily, he has an editor and friend in Hilda Rasula, an editor who has cut many things that fall within the comedy, dark comedy, drama genres, in both film and television. American Fiction stars Jeffrey Wright as Monk, a frustrated novelist who's fed up with the establishment, hey, who isn't, and how it profits from a kind of black entertainment that relies on tired and offensive tropes. To prove his point, he uses a pen name to write an outlandish black book of his own, a book that propels him to the heart of hypocrisy and the madness he claims to disdain. That's a great line, and a great premise. But having a great premise is just a start. You need so many things to work after that to make a terrific movie. And that early and growing buzz you may have noticed about this film certainly would indicate that Hilda, Cord, and the whole American Fiction team have indeed made a terrific movie. I think so. And we have a lot to talk about with Hilda. I kind of fanboyed out on her a little to start this interview because I was over anxious to share my thoughts on the movie, but she rolled with it like a pro. And you'll hear all that in just a minute. But first, I need to fanboy out on the amazing people who help to bring you this podcast. Our sponsor, Extreme Music. If you are no stranger to The Rough Cut, you know that Extreme Music provides a fully rights-cleared catalog of the best production music out there. Music created by A-list musicians, A-list composers, A-list producers. Even A-list doesn't cut it. It's a double A-list, an A-plus list. A list that has names like Hans Zimmer, John Powell, Quincy Jones, Atticus Ross. Those are names that you'd love to have in your credit roll. And by going to see Extreme Music, you can make that happen. That sounds too easy, you say. Well, it kind of is. All you have to do is go to extrememusic.com and search their catalog with keywords like tempo, genre, composer, and any other little hints you want to give them, and they'll find you just what you need. You can customize the instrumentation, you can choose different track lengths, you can even use their amazing reference track feature to give them a track so they can find you ones just like it. All of the licensing can be done online, or they have actual human beings who can talk you through it. So the next time you have a story to tell, be it a movie, a TV show, an ad, a PSA perhaps, make sure to visit our friends at extrememusic.com. You know that I am always excited for these interviews, and today is no exception. Won't you please welcome, from American Fiction, editor Hilda Rasula.
You're missing a word or something.
With the magic of AI, I can just put new words right in there.
Oh my God.
No, I never do. I have been very anxious to talk to you about this movie, mostly because you entertain me, but partly because you fake me out a little. And that's also why I want to start this interview in a manner that's a little different from my norm. And I will explain, so bear with me.
Okay.
But before I do, so I can explain myself later, first I'd like to hear your description of the premise of the film.
I think that American Fiction is first and foremost about a writer who wants to tell stories. And because he's a writer who is not getting published and is frustrated with the state of the book industry and its rejections of his writings, he does something kind of outrageous that's a private joke to him. And the joke turns into a terrible, monstrous success. But that's really one layer of the film. The film at its heart, I think, is really basically a dramedy about a writer and his family.
At one point in the film, Monk Ellison is the protagonist, played by Jeffrey Wright. He says, "I don't believe in race. The problem is everybody else does." So you just told us what the film is about. With that quote in mind, what did director Cord Jefferson want to say with this movie? What did he say to you? Like, here's what I'm really trying to do with this film.
On the surface, the logline of this movie is that it's a satire, and people are going to write about it first and foremost being a cultural satire and a satire about identity politics and race. But I think that Cord Jefferson and really all of us making the movie really wanted to Trojan horse in a very different kind of story, which is to say a human story about a writer who is struggling to understand himself regardless of race. It is in part a story about the ways in which we all get pigeonholed and we want to break free of those molds, and the ways in which different people in our careers attempt to sand down our individual edges or make us conform to certain ideas they have of who they think we are. But I think that ultimately it's actually a much more kind of humanist story. I hope it is. And what we really wanted to do was tell a story that is universal about people, a man in the middle of a midlife crisis.
Well, the film is based on the novel Erasure. Did you read that, or did Cord give you anything else for reference?
No, I am at the point in my career where I have decided that it's better for me not to read the source material. I think it can go both ways. And of course, if a director asked me to read a book before going into the edit process, I would do it for them. But I really like to use the screenplay as the guide. To me, the screenplay sets out the intentions of what a film wants to be far better than any kind of novel or source material or stage play or whatever it's coming from than they could ever do. So I think that I have to take the script, use that as the North Star, and follow it wherever it's ultimately meant to go.
I got to admit, you have me intrigued with your at this point in my career. What has happened in your career that made you change from, oh, I better go read that book to, no, just stick to the script?
No, no terrible skeletons in my closet. I think it's that I'm finally at the age I'm at now, which I won't say, is I'm finally getting to a point in my life where I'm trusting my instincts more and more. And my instinct to use the screenplay as the source material and use that as the guiding light, and then go from there using every tool at my disposal about how I react to the footage. That really should be the guide more than anything else. And I'm starting to gain more and more confidence at this kind of mid-career point of trusting in those instincts, you know?
Well, I'm glad you used that word confidence. We're going to return to that in a little bit. The setup of the premise is accomplished in the first 3 scenes in about 5 minutes. It goes very fast.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is leading to something, but tell me about working out that open and possibly reworking it out.
Yeah, it was a question of reworking. The first scene that you see was always the opening scene of the movie, and it's a kind of polemical scene. But we used to have a different scene too, and it was a slow conversation that didn't have almost any conflict in it. And that was just clearly not going to be the right way to have a movie start. We needed something else for scene 2, and we knew this for a long time. So that had a target on its back right from the beginning. But we kind of shoved that one to the side for a while, just knowing that we were going to change it. And you know, when you're screening a movie, eventually you get to the point where you're doing these friends and family screenings, you have parts of the movie that are still in that you know you're going to replace with reshoots later and rewrites, but they are like a kind of necessary evil. You just have to live with them for a while until you can finally change them. So scene 2 was always targeted as being a rewrite, a full rewrite. And Cord went back and wrote this great other scene that put Monk in a state of real crisis in his life where he actually had to leave town. I mean, really, what's happening in that scene is he's in trouble. You know, his sort of paying gig of being a session professor, kind of sessional teacher at a university, is now in trouble because of his behavior / the ways of the world, the problematic ways of the world. And we knew that we just needed to get him into a place where he had no choice but to go back to Boston, where he's from, and he had to confront everything going on in his family. His character actually just really wasn't on that path at the beginning. And so that was a big thing right from the start.
You just explained what the premise was. Things aren't working out for him. He's got to return to Boston, and he goes to a reading of another author and is looking at like, wow, people love what I consider to be work that's selling out, that's pandering. And then we meet his family, and the film kind of slows down a little bit to get to know the family. And I have to admit, I was like, okay, well, we're ready to go. Let's go. We've got the conflict. But you don't do that. You slow things down. We get to know the family, and you took the time to really give a real motivation to what his character needs.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the sort of quietly subversive thing that you pointed out that the movie is doing on a larger structural level, and maybe even filmmaking cultural level, is really just to make a family dramedy about Black characters going through incredibly universal things, but not having it be a period piece, not having it be about a quote unquote larger issue or be an issue movie. You know, that is really what this film is trying to do. And so, of course, we have to take the time. I mean, the whole point is for us to understand Monk and his family and the incredibly complicated sibling dynamics that he has, which I think are really relatable. And the whole situation going on with his mom. He has an aging parent who is not doing great and is getting worse. And again, I think for a lot of us, that is a really common story and an issue that a lot of us are going through and dealing with right now. So these are really kind of universal, big, broad things that are happening. But if you don't slow the film down at least a little bit and you really take the time to shade in those characters, they don't mean as much. I mean, it doesn't mean as much. And the satire element is, you know, the motivations for him needing to make money and do all of that. Those are integral to the plot continuing on as it does. And of course, his character needs those motivations, but it just does work better if it's earned in a slightly more organic way, I think.
The trailer does a very good job of setting up the premise, which is what trailers are supposed to do. It also features some of the biggest laughs from the film. Watching the trailer, you might think this is going to be one big straight up laugh riot comedy. But as we just discussed, there are poignant moments and really great family dynamics to explore. And, you know, you have this big shock in the beginning of the movie. It feels like a jolt that the movie is taking a serious turn. I always ask this because I consider it one of the more challenging things an editor has to do, but that balancing the funny and the drama so that you land the movie on the right tone. As you were working through this movie, at times did it feel like you might be leaning too far one way or the other? And what did you do to balance it back out?
There were a zillion times when it felt like it might be leaning too far in one direction or the other. And ultimately, I think that was the real blood, sweat, and tears of cutting this movie, was finding that tone and doing a lot of pacing experiments to figure out where we could find that balance. For instance, in the comedy scenes, we had a lot of discussions about making sure that it never became pure farce. You know, there are absurd things happening, of course, and it's meant to be funny, but we actually could have gone bigger and we chose not to. I mean, there were a lot of moments when in specific beats or specific reactions when we chose to pull back a little bit and certainly make it a big comedy scene, but pull back just enough that it wasn't going into outrageous farce like this would never happen in the real world. We wanted to keep just a tiny tether to groundedness, to at least believe that this could happen in the real world. So that's one thing we did with the comedy scenes. And then in the more dramatic leaning scenes, we worked hard as well to lighten those a little bit. You know, when the kind of the color palette of some of those scenes was getting into really blue, dark indigo territory, we lightened it up a little bit. I mean, those little edges of comedy that Cord finds in his writing were always there, you know, a dark scene or a sad scene, and then something unexpectedly funny comes out of a character's mouth. That's all Cord. But we had to work hard shaping and pacing those scenes so that they didn't dip down into a kind of valley that was almost impossible to get out of, you know, before you go back into a more comedic leaning scene.
Well, thank you for letting me get all that out there first. Now we can get back to more of the traditional foundational questions, starting with getting the job and meeting Cord. Tell me about how you were connected to him and the interview process and what you two talked about.
This job came to me in a very traditional way. My agent called me and said, okay, I've got a great script. She didn't even mention Cord's name. She just said, it's a good script. I'm going to send it to you in a few minutes. Be on the lookout, you know. And then it landed in my inbox and I was like, oh my God, Cord Jefferson. I know Cord. Cord and I already knew each other socially. Not well, but we have a good friend in common, my friend Anne, who strangely enough used to be his editor at a magazine back in the days when he was a journalist. So it's like Cord has this wild, completely other, he's lived many lives, but he has this other history where he was a journalist for quite a while. And we have this very dear friend in common. And so I'd seen him at barbecues at her house, that sort of thing. We really weren't close at all, barely knew each other, but that's how I met him. And then we really just connected over the universalities in the script. I loved just how kind of warm and human it was. And I also really loved this balance in his writing where he really does love the funny, but he also really loves the melancholy. Like, there is a part of him that just loves leading into little sad, vicious little moments, you know? And I love that too, actually. I mean, I really love a movie that has heart, but also teeth. And I feel like that is there in his writing. And I also have cut dark comedies or dramedies in the past, so it did feel like a kind of pretty natural fit for me.
You've been doing features off and on for about 10 years, films like Vengeance and Moving On, but this is Cord's directorial debut.
Yeah.
When I watch a movie, I try to think how I would describe it in a few words, or even one if I can. And the word that came to mind for American fiction, I told you we were going to return to this, was confident. The choices that you made, like the ones we already discussed, but also throughout the whole movie, said to me that you all had a very clear idea of what you did and didn't want for the movie. With that in mind, what is it like working with a director who is not only a first-time director, but also a director who is the screenwriter? Because confident is not exactly the first word I would think of in that scenario.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think we had a lot of sort of gifts going into this movie, which was a really solid script. So that was a great foundation. And Cord's experience as a television writer, as a really experienced and gifted television writer, was great because it meant that although he was not used to being in the director's chair, he was used to taking notes, frankly. You know, years of writing in television and being in writers' rooms meant that he was very collaborative. And he really understood the idea that we're making this for an audience. This was not some pet project for himself. We're making this film to share with the world, and he wanted to share the story with the world. So we always operated from a kind of really open-minded, really open-hearted kind of standpoint. He also was humble and good about, frankly, letting me do my thing. I mean, not every first-time director is like that, but because in this case, he hadn't been in that role before, at least in his case, it is not true for everyone. In Cord's case, he really respected what I needed to do on sort of nuts and bolts filmmaking levels. So he wasn't tied to like, you have to be in this angle on that line. And then, of course, we need to cut to this. And then I expected that by here, we'd be in this angle. He had none of that. He didn't have any of that in the room. It was really about the feeling of the kind of story he wanted to make. And so he really trusted me pretty openly and generously to find what every scene needed, whether that meant really fussy performance tweaking stuff or just necessary cuts that come when you don't have a ton of angles.
Well, the movie was shot on location in the Boston area, which was smart because that's where the movie's supposed to take place. Were you cutting on location during production, and how long did production run for?
I was here in LA and they were in Boston. Production ran for 5 weeks. So it was a cool 25 days, which was great, but they did squeeze in a lot of locations during that time and a lot of location shooting. So it was, I think, pretty intense over there in Boston from what I was hearing. Just a lot to do every day, you know, like a lot of pages to get done every day, sometimes a lot of locations. It was a lot. But I was luckily kept far from the fray and I would just sit in North Hollywood cutting away.
How do you feel about doing a little editing room lightning round?
Great. Yeah, go for it.
You kind of have to say yes, otherwise.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do you like to have your cutting room set up?
Well, the first thing you would see that I am known for is the rug. I have this rug that I travel with from office to office, and it's always the same colorful rug. It's this vintage rug from Afghanistan from the 60s. And I carry it around from place to place, and it makes me feel at home. I also bring a couple of special cool pillows in for the couch in the room, and it sets the stage, I think, for creating a feeling when the director walks in the room that they're at home. This may be a workplace, but there's a certain domesticity to it as well. And that this is a place where we're going to share confidences. This is a place where we can be comfortable if they need to take a nap, if they need to talk about their mom while laying down on the couch, anything they need to do, which directors do, you have to set the stage for them feeling comfortable for that. Because I think ultimately there's a lot of emotional work and psychological work that actually ultimately takes place when you're cutting a movie. And that's kind of the beginnings of it. Everything in my Avid is a separate thing. I like a pretty basic setup. I love Avid for what it can do. Your hands do things before you can even think them almost when you've been working with something like Avid for a long time. So that's a different thing. No crazy bells and whistles there, really. But yeah, it's important for me to have a warm, welcoming environment.
What was the Dailies process? How did that work?
Because they were on the East Coast, we had a little bit of delay. They would take the dailies, send them to a lab, and then they would get sent to us through Aspera. So we were always cutting like a further 6 hours out from the way we would have if we were in Los Angeles, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I was always kind of like a further half day behind.
When you say sent them to the lab, are we talking in the traditional process? Was this movie shot on film, or are we talking just digitally processing?
No, sorry, this was digitally. We didn't have the money for film.
Few people do.
Few people do.
Well, okay. What did they shoot and how many cameras were used?
Mostly single camera. This was really a very traditional, almost old school movie in a lot of ways. Again, we just unfortunately did not have the budget to have 2 cameras running every single day. So there were a couple occasions where we needed a few cameras. There's a couple of big scenes where we needed 3 cameras. And we brought them in just for that. But it was a lot of single camera shooting and, in a sense, a very traditional edit. I mean, there's ways in which I was like, oh, wow, this is a movie that in some ways could have been made years and years ago, Again, I think of it as being like slightly classical in that way. No crazy VFX. I mean, there's hidden VFX because we live in the modern world and you use the tools at your disposal. But apart from those, it's a very traditional movie, actually.
So what are the tools at your disposal that you use to do the non-VFX-y VFX?
Non-VFX, it's just me being really fussy about performance and timing, that sort of thing. So I'll use split screens a lot to manipulate the timing of performances between 2 different characters. I'll do invisible speeding up and slowing down to kind of hold a look in somebody's eye for longer. It's just really, really basic things, but that to me mean a lot when you're really massaging the timing and polishing the timing of like a dialogue scene, A dialogue scene in some ways can be a very simple scene to cut, and in some ways is, I think, the hardest scene to cut. Trying to get the vibe right between 2 characters, trying to make the feeling match the feeling that you had when you read the scene on the page is like this thing that I'm always chasing.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you brought up just a single camera, because looking at the credits, it seems like a relatively small crew. I mean, I don't know what the budget was, but on a smaller film, on indie films, do you find that you have to take on slightly more responsibility as an editor than you might on a larger film or on a TV show where there's just really more people in place to do all these different things?
I mean, I guess to the degree that I find that there's a little more responsibility that you take on in the offline edit with music. On television shows I've worked on, there's a music supervisor and there's a department who's on early enough that you can go to. Maybe hopefully they've hired somebody already and you know who you're going to be working with on a series. And on this, it wasn't that way. We didn't hire our composer until later in the game, and we didn't have the budget for, not that there's almost no like needle drops or anything like that in this movie, but we were temping with jazz, which is tricky to temp with as film score. So I did need to take on more responsibilities in terms of just sort of being my own music supervisor and my own music editor right from the get-go, but working in a vein that is not as easy as just cutting with temp score. So
not a lot of needle drops, but left up to you to do that?
Yeah. Yeah, left up to me, thrust upon me. Yes. But I will say I love working with music. And that's also where just sort of the kind of creative control freak side of me comes out. It's so fun to play with music, you know? It's fun to actually have that kind of control, even though it's just temp. It's fun to get in there and hear something while you're driving in your car that's like, oh my God, what an amazing intro, you know, to this song. I love it. I can already picture it like playing at the end of that scene and that look in his eyes. So you just get inspired by things. And so it is actually fun to have that freedom.
Well, hearing you use that word inspiration, is your approach typically to cut with music, something that's inspiring you, or do you like to cut the scene first and then go back and try the music?
I always just cut the scenes first dry. If it's something that's incredibly music dependent, that's in a particularly rhythmic way, then I will cut with music, like a montage or something that's really, really music driven. Sometimes I will try to find music first, but generally speaking, no, I cut everything dry and try to get it to work dry, you know, knowing that it's going to need music, but music plays tricks on you, you know, especially music can make you cut things too long. And so I think that it's better if you try it dry. And then when I'm building and assembling a kind of larger assembly, then I'll try to feel the spots where you're sort of crying out for music. And it's like, okay, music must go here. This transition just doesn't work without something.
Well, the final runtime is what is these days a brisk 2 hours. What was the length of your first assembly, and what were the spots that you found that you really needed to refine or maybe remove to get it to 2 hours?
I think the first assembly was 2:28. It was almost 2.5 hours.
That's pretty tight.
Yeah, that's not bad, especially for comedy. I try to pace as I go, which is a little bit more laborious, I will admit, in dailies. And I know not everybody does this, and there's no one right way, you know, to cut dailies. But I do try to pace as I go, because if I cut a scene too loose right at the beginning, it also can feel like it's not working, even though it is actually truly a good scene, you know? So I try to do that just as I'm cutting, just in little ways, without cutting lines, of course, you know, that comes later, but just in any way that I can find a good rhythm right from the get-go. But we did end up cutting a lot of stuff out. I think we cut 11 scenes out of this movie, which, you know, for a certain movie is nothing, but for a movie like this actually was quite a lot. And we paced up scenes a lot too.
Well, going back to our confident director, Cord Jefferson, does he give you a lot of coverage, a lot of alternate takes to work with?
Not really, but that's not Cord's fault. We really just had a tight shooting schedule where we were racing around to so many locations, trying to cover so many pages a day that there was not an option to get a ton of coverage. There were a few specific scenes where they had planned it to take more time, like the endings. That obviously took a certain amount of planning, and we knew we needed very specific elements for that. So sure, there was some days like that, but a lot of the days were just like, there was not time to get major coverage. We had to make it work. And it was about finding the good performance and finding the right mood and vibe of the scene. And once they had nailed that, they would move on.
People listening very closely, they heard you use the word endings with an S. You know, we spent a fair bit of time talking about getting that open right. And then you have the multiple or alternate endings, which was a very interesting way to go. Again, going back to that confident choice. How did you arrive at doing that? I mean, was it always tightly scripted and executed, or was there some discovery to that process?
It definitely was a process to figure out exactly what the ending needed to be. I think, like most movies, endings and beginnings are tough, you know, and straight from day one with Cord, we knew those were definitely like the two things that were like, oh, we're going to have to figure out the beginning and act one more broadly. And then there's some question marks about the end. We had an end that was working for a long time. That was great. But when we started showing it to people at friends and family screenings and talking to them afterwards, we realized that there was like, I don't know, I would say roughly 20% of people who didn't like the ending. And it ended on a very, I'll just say it ended on a very cheeky note that kind of lived in the satire, that lived in the satirical storyline. And ultimately, we had a zillion discussions about this, obviously. What does the ending need to be? And ultimately, we came around to this idea that Cord had, which is that if the film was ultimately this human story, this sort of human dramedy about this writer and his family and him discovering his voice and who he wanted to be, that was the direction. That was the note that the film needed to land on, not landing on a joke, which really kind of was, there was this very funny joke that it landed on, but we decided that it needed to land somewhere a little more meaningful and a little closer to the ground.
Besides the feedback on the ending or endings, what did you hear from test audiences about the film at large? What were the things that they thought maybe you should change or correct or do more of?
Luckily, people were fairly positive right from the first Friends and Family screening. We had a few people right away, and really, I think I would say at every Friends and Family screening, we had at least one or two people who said, this movie says things that I've been thinking in my head privately for years. That's amazing. So that was great to have a little bit of that just sort of positive feedback. But, you know, the larger thing that the feedback that we did get was really about pace, finding the balance of Monk's family storyline with his professional storyline was a delicate operation that ultimately took us months to figure out. I mean, we really played with just how long should certain scenes be, how late can we get into them, how fast can we get out, because at certain moments, I think we were on the verge of losing people, basically. So we really sculpted those things and played around with that. And then the other thing is we had this Act 1 problem, basically. So many movies do, you know, yeah. It's a thing. But we did have this problem where we used to go to the family storyline even earlier. And we spent several scenes with his family before he goes and sees Issa Rae.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that was the way it was originally scripted. And ultimately, we realized that that just wasn't what it needed to be. It took me an embarrassingly long time to truly figure it out. I think we were 8 months into cutting before one day I was like, oh my God, I think what we need to do, Cord, go away. You know, leave me alone. And he left me alone for a day. And I just played around with reordering how we receive that information about him and how we meet him ultimately, and realized that we wanted to meet him and learn a little bit more about his professional life and the kind of systems that he was fighting against. You know, we need to learn about that structure that he finds so oppressive before we can meet his family and get to know a different side of him, basically. But those scenes with Issa Rae were tied to other scenes and events that in a way that it seemed impossible to move them around in the way that they ended up getting moved around. In order to do it, we actually did have to cut a couple of other scenes. Just the timeline didn't work, you know, of the events, the timeline of the story. And so we had to make this like really hard sacrifice of losing some scenes that we loved. But in order to achieve ultimately what I think was a far greater gain, which was learning about Monk in the right order.
You said that revelation came 8 months into the cutting process. I asked you about production. How long was post?
10 months.
10 months.
Yeah.
And I also asked you quite a bit about the director you were working with. I didn't ask about who was working with you, your assistants or assistant. Tell me about your crew and what you look for in a good assistant.
So I was working with Charmaine Cavan, who was amazing. My good friend, Kate Haight, told me about Charm. And she was wonderful. She really was there with me right from the beginning in that kind of like, you tell me what you need. I am yours. I will work so hard for this. It was, I think, a kind of, you know, like just a special good opportunity for her as well. So she was sort of out to prove to me how great she could be and how brilliant she was. And then that just naturally came out in working together. I mean, not only was she just proficient and nice and cool in all of the ways that I think an assistant needs to be, but one of the things that I really love in a great assistant is the ability to, in those rare moments when you can sit back and talk with each other about the film or view things together. Sometimes we would take the time, you know, on a Friday afternoon or whatever to look at a series of scenes together or look at a chunk of the film and be able to just discuss it together. And Charm had these great revelations and reactions that helped me understand Monk even further, or what the audience is going through at different moments in those stages before you can put it in front of a real audience, when you're just really building the thing. So to me, what I look for in a good assistant is somebody who cares about movies and cares about character and story more than anything else, honestly. The more technical aspects of the job are like a given. You have to have those, but so many people have those. It's the other stuff that's special.
We've talked a lot about the trouble with Act One and figuring out those endings. The most challenging aspect of working on this project for you, what was that?
Really, the most challenging thing was probably nailing the tone. I mean, yes, we had a very clear sense of the kind of movie that we were setting out to make and that we wanted to make right from the beginning. But it was funny. We, also at these friends and family screenings, sometimes at the end of them, my producer, Ben, would ask around the room, like, okay, what's a comp for this movie? Is there a movie that this reminds you of? And it is amazing how often it was just crickets. Like people, they would say, okay, maybe there's a little bit of this film and I guess a dash of this movie, but there really wasn't a specific thing that they could just say, it's this, And so we had a clear idea in our head of what movie we wanted to make, but we did somehow feel like we had to carve out our own new path to really find that tone, to say, how are we going to swing from the comedy to the drama? How are we going to find that mix of absurdity and then utter realness at different moments and somehow make it feel organic, like these different vibes all live in the same unified real world that we live in too, and make it feel somehow universal, hopefully, to the audience. So that was, like, honestly, finding the tone was a tricky thing. And we ultimately needed all the time we had to get there.
Well, I told you the other day that my favorite scene was when Monk is asked about how it feels for him to be back home in Boston reluctantly. And he says, great, I already had some guy in a Bruins jersey ask me if I thought I was better than him,
right.
Which is a great line and perfectly sums up the Boston experience. So that's my favorite scene. What was yours?
The scene when Monk is writing the novel, the kind of sick joke of a novel that he makes that becomes this Frankenstein monster. That scene was a very special scene because, first of all, I think it's really hard to visualize or make cinematic scenes where a character is writing. I mean, it's just not easy to do. And of course, you could have approached it in a different way. You could have just cut to the version of, we could have gone to an entirely location and cut to the scene realized whole before our eyes. But Cord did this very special, different thing, which was to play in this weird in-between zone where it's like a touch of magic realism and you're breaking the walls of what's real just enough that you're letting the audience know that this is a fiction. And you're sort of hinting at the concepts of fiction making that are to come later in the story as well. And so bringing these characters to life in the room with him like that was just a special, weird, interesting thing. And the actors were so great. I just had so much fun cutting that.
Yeah, they were great. We've already established your affinity for rugs and I guess for interior decorating. But as we wrap this up, and I underline the word wrap, what gift would you like most to receive this holiday season?
Oh my God, what gift? I will take, wow, what a question. Okay, I'm going to have to think about that. What gift would I like? Wow. I think I want, the gift. Oh no. Sorry. Something very absurd popped into my head, which is I have to tell my kids that I'm leaving the country and they don't know yet.
That's the gift?
No, I'm afraid they're going to freak out. And I was thinking that's the gift. No, that is not the gift. Really this holiday season for this movie, I think what I want is the gift of a warm reception. I hope that people can receive this movie into their hearts with the same spirit that we had making it, which was like the desire to create something human, that is not at an outrageous scale film, but just something that is human and real. And I hope that it somehow comes across that way and touches people in the same way, because we really sort of like got into it. Like this was one that was special and that got into everyone's hearts, that was working on it. And I hope that the world can receive it in that way.
Well, you were definitely already going to get that. So how about maybe some drapes to match the rug or something?
Right. I don't know. A nice candle. What I want, honestly, is also, I want a bigger cutting room for my next project. The only thing that was not ideal about the rug and the cozy couch was that we were in a pretty tight space on this one. Yeah. My next time, I want a little more breathing room.
Well, that sounds good. And I'll see what I've got around here at Avid for you.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's not looking good, Hilda. I think all I've got left are mouse pads with old Avid logos and a few pens that probably don't write anymore. I'd make some rough cut swag, but then I'd be sitting on that stuff until I'm 80. But don't worry, I'll find you something good. You deserve it for all your hard work, and for entertaining me and anyone else that sees American fiction. Hopefully all of you listening make time to see it so you can be entertained as well. And of course, a big thanks to Hilda for talking to us today. You know, it's getting kind of late in this holiday season, but there is still time to do some last-minute shopping for you and all your hip editor friends. And if they are truly hip, they would love to get a 1-year subscription to Avid Media Composer. Think of all the great stories they could tell with it. Maybe they'll even thank you in their Oscar speech. Who knows? Only way for you to really find out is to visit the Media Composer page on avid.com. Over there, you can learn about all the latest features and also grab a monthly or annual subscription, annual's better, to Hollywood's most beloved editing platform. As always, the magic link in the show notes will help you with that. I think, this will be the last episode of the year. Like you, I have a ton of things to do right now. And I probably should have written up something halfway intelligent and gracious to say to you to close out the year, but I didn't. Sorry. But you know that I appreciate you and could not and would not keep doing this show without your support. So thank you for that. I sincerely, and that is a word that does not come easy to me, sincerely hope that this podcast has entertained you, educated you, and maybe even provided a nice distraction at a time when maybe things weren't going so great. Hopefully next year goes great for all of us. Until we do meet again, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.